President Trump has regrets, one of them being his pick for Attorney General. He also has a warning for Special Counselor Robert Mueller. Hands off my family's finances. Plus, the shocking news for a lion of the Senate. This is the State of America tonight.
I have recused myself in the matters that deal with the Trump campaign.
If he was going to recuse himself, he should have told me before he took the job, and I would have picked somebody else.
I was very surprised that he said it on the record.
I have the honor of serving as Attorney General. We love this job, we love this department, and I plan to continue to do so.
The president is angry, and when Donald Trump is angry, he tells you he's angry.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kate Baldwin, live in New York. To our viewers watching around the world, this is State of America tonight. Jeff Sessions, Rod Rosenstein, Bob Mueller. What do they all have in common? They are all current or former Justice Department officials, yes. Well, today, they are all targets of President Trump as well. In a remarkable and at times blistering interview with the New York Times, the president slams the group of men on everything from their hometowns to how they are handling their jobs, starting with Attorney General Jeff Sessions.
Sessions gets the job. Right after he gets the job, he recuses himself.
Was that a mistake?
Well, Sessions should have never recused himself. And if he was going to recuse himself, he should have told me before he took the job, and I would have picked somebody else.
You heard that right. This isn't just any person in any position in the administration. Jeff Sessions was one of the earliest and most loyal supporters of President Trump's presidential bid. For that, he was granted one of the premier cabinet posts, the country's top law enforcement officer. He is the man in charge of the entire Department of Justice. But now it's apparently meh. Here's one of the reporters who conducted this wild ride of an interview for the Times.
Peter Baker and I wrote several weeks ago that the president was fuming at Jeff Sessions. This has just been going on for quite some time over the recusal. The president sees the recusal as the original sin. What was striking and what jumped out at me was that he said it to us.
Right, publicly, on the record, right, and said it on the record and more than once. The president also went after Sessions number 2 at the Department of Justice, Rod Rosenstein. Trump, by way of making fun of Rosenstein's hometown, criticized Rosenstein for bringing on the special counsel in the first place. Both officials, Rosenstein and Sessions, responded today in a nutshell. They're just going to work.
I have the honor of serving as Attorney General. It's something that goes beyond any thought I would have ever had for myself. We love this job, we love this department, and I plan to continue to do so as long as that is appropriate.
As the Attorney General said, we are working here every day to advance the priorities of the Department of Justice and the administration. I was proud to be here yesterday. I'm proud to be here today. I'll be proud to work here tomorrow. And we are spending every minute working to advance the interests of the department.
But wait, there's more. There always is. In that same interview, President Trump offered a warning shot of sorts for Special Counselor Robert Mueller, the man in charge of the Russia investigation being conducted at the Justice Department. The president says he better tread lightly around his family's finances.
Mueller was looking at your finances and your family's finances unrelated to Russia. Is that a red line?
Would that be a breach of what his actual
I would say yes. Yeah, I would say yes.
The president wouldn't say, however, what he'd do if he thought Mueller had crossed the line there. A quick note also, CNN has reported the FBI is already scrutinizing part of the Trump empire. So there you have it. And remember that previously undisclosed meeting between President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin at the G20? According to Trump, here's what they talked about.
Actually, it was very interesting. We talked about adoption.
Mm-hmm. You did?
Russian adoption, yeah. Mm-hmm. I've always found that interesting because, he ended that years ago. Mm-hmm. And I actually talked about Russian adoption with him, which is interesting because that was a part of a conversation that Don had with this meeting that I think, as I said, most other people, when they call up and they say, by the way, we have information on your opponent. Mm-hmm. I think most politicians, I was just with a lot of people, they said, who wouldn't have taken a meeting like that?
Who would take a meeting like that? Who wouldn't take a meeting like that? Well, for one, almost every politician and campaign hand I've talked to, because this was information that was promised to have been coming from a foreign adversary, from the Russian government directly. And also, in hindsight, by the way, even his son Don Jr. says he would have done things differently. He said that also on the record to the media. But that is beside the point. In that one quick soundbite right there, the president there is confirming that dinner small talk with Putin at the G20 summit was more than small talk, apparently. They talked, when he says they talked adoption, that means they talked about sanctions. But again, there's no record of exactly what was said, so who knows if we'll ever know. One thing we do know today is there's some very sad news that is still settling in, all from Washington across the country. Senator John McCain, a longtime member of the Senate and a former Republican nominee for president, has been diagnosed with an aggressive form of brain cancer.
Glioblastoma is a type of brain tumor. It's an aggressive brain tumor. It's a type of brain cancer. It is also the type of brain cancer that Senator Ted Kennedy had many years ago. This particular type of cancer has a prognosis of about 14 months of survival with treatment, including radiation and chemotherapy. There are people who have been longer-term survivors. About 10% of people survive 5 years or more.
John McCain is a man who has fought and beat some impossible odds already in his life. He served in Vietnam. He was captured and held as a prisoner of war for 5 years, enduring excruciating torture throughout that time. His wounds are still evident today, as he cannot raise his arms above his shoulders due to how he was treated then. Here's the thing. McCain could have easily gotten out of that hell. His father was a Navy admiral. When the Vietnamese found out about that, McCain refused to leave his fellow prisoners behind, staying there longer still. And after that, when he did get out, that was just the beginning of a long life of service for John McCain, serving now in Congress for decades, running unsuccessfully for president twice. He may now be facing his toughest opponent yet, though. Here is one of McCain's closest friends in the Senate, fellow Republican Lindsey Graham.
God knows how this ends, not me. But I do know this. This disease has never had a more worthy opponent.
And true to form, here was McCain's first public message he put out just today since the diagnosis, tweeting this out. I greatly appreciate the outpouring of support. Unfortunately for my sparring partners in Congress, I'll be back soon, so stand by. No matter where you fall on the political spectrum, everyone can and should agree. We wish Senator McCain a swift and speedy recovery so he can get right back to his favorite fight, Washington politics, very, very soon. With that moment, let us turn back to that very same fight that McCain loves so much, or at least the fight that the President of the United States seems to be picking today with some of his own team, taking on a member of his cabinet, a top official at the Justice Department, and the man now in charge of running the investigation into Russian meddling in the election, all in one little interview. Jeremy Diamond is following all of this and joins me now from Washington. So, Jeremy, the president, of course, we all know, is not one to keep his thoughts to himself. That's why everyone loves to follow his Twitter feed, the unfiltered access to the president. But this seems something new. What is the White House saying about this interview?
Well, so far, we have not heard anything official from the White House. Deputy Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders is set to brief the press momentarily. We're waiting on her to take the first questions since this interview took place. But just the fact that the White House has not so far sought to express any confidence in Jeff Sessions or kind of try and nuance the president's remarks speaks really to the weight that these comments from the president in this interview carry and will carry going forward. The president, as we know, for weeks has been quietly frustrated with Attorney General Jeff Sessions' recusal in conversations with his associates and his advisors inside and outside the White House. But publicly, this is really the first major rebuke that we're seeing from the president of his attorney general. And we saw Jeff Sessions today try and, uncomfortably deal with these questions of the president appearing to lose confidence in him. Jeff Sessions so far signaling that he is going to remain in this position as Attorney General. But again, this does raise questions about why the president felt the need to bring this up during this interview. Many in the White House, in the West Wing in particular, were really caught off guard by the fact that the president chose this venue in this moment to bring up his thoughts on Jeff Sessions. Yesterday, of course, was all about health care at the White House. We had the president sitting down with almost all Republican senators at the White House, urging them to get back to work to repeal and replace Obamacare, not just the repeal now and delay, but the repeal and replace effort that had been judged all but dead just this week. And so the president here really turning attention away from what he was just urging Republican senators to focus on. Kate?
Yep. Quickly on message and just as quickly off message, all in one. It was about a 2-hour period. Great to see you, Jeremy. Thank you so much. Coming up, if your boss tells the New York Times that he regrets hiring you, what is your next move? Do you pack up? Do you stay in the office? If that boss is the President of the United States, how does that change your calculation? The President, his top justice officials, and their now uncertain future. The panel is next.
Thank you for listening to the CNN podcast. In order to better serve you, we are conducting a short survey. To help us, please go to cnn.com/podcast survey. And to get more podcasts from us, just search CNN in iTunes or your favorite podcast app.
Jeff Sessions says he'll stay on as Attorney General as long as that is appropriate. Those are his words. So who now decides that? How long it's appropriate, after President Trump made clear to the New York Times he regrets hiring Sessions? And what caused Trump to turn on one of his earliest and strongest supporters? Like so many storylines in the White House, look to Russia. The panel tonight, Kayleigh McEnany is here, CNN political commentator and contributor to The Hill publication. Peter Beinart is a CNN political commentator and contributing editor at The Atlantic. Jim Garrity is a senior political correspondent at The National Review, and Danielle McLaughlin is here. She is a Democratic strategist and attorney at Nixon Peabody. All right, friends, let's get to it. Jim, what is your, I'll just leave it at this. What is your best guess, if you could? Why would the president go after Jeff Sessions on the record in public at this moment?
Sure, very simple answer. Lack of impulse control, which we've seen all across his president. Look, I don't begrudge the president for having irritation with his attorney general.
Right.
Bill
happened
Clinton,
before.
Bill Clinton and Janet. This by itself is not new. Doing it on the record to an interview with the failing New York Times, the sad New York Times that he keeps fuming about with the fake news.
Still some of his favorite reporters to speak with.
And he spends 50 minutes with them, and he goes on and he complains about this. Now, I don't know, Sessions, you said today, it was like, look, I'm going to hang around for as long as it's appropriate. Yeah. If heaven forbid, the head of CNN came out and said she's doing a terrible job, how long would you want to stay in your job if your boss comes out and trashes you?
That's why I asked the same thing. That's why I truly do wonder it. Here's the only complicating factor in all. It's all complicated, actually. But here's one complicating factor. To that point, if your boss says, I regret that I hired you, why? The only person who has the power to fire Jeff Sessions is Donald Trump. And Jeff Sessions, Kayleigh, offered his resignation up in the spring when there was some tension going back and forth about this. What does this get the president just taking him on, but then leaving him in the job?
Well, what it gets him is us not talking about the Republicans' delayed health care bill, which is what Americans really care about. So that I think was honestly the strategy.
Do you think it's a helpful one?
I think so. Look, this is a better day for him.
Don't you
talking about this?
You don't think he
than
wants
talking
to talk
about the Republican health care bill?
You think it's better for us to be talking about Russia and him wanting to fire Jeff Sessions than talking about the Republicans' efforts to try to come together?
Yes, because Americans care about repealing and replacing Obamacare. That's not happening right now. This is the biggest slowdown on this administration. Their success going forward is getting this through, and right now it's not happening. They're at a deadlock. That's not a good narrative. I'd rather have this narrative right now than the health care bill.
I am floored by that, Kayleigh.
But Kayleigh, there are a million different things you could throw out there. Like, the economy's doing better, the stock market's doing better.
They repealed a bunch of regulations.
You can. It's possible, presumably, to make news without shooting yourself in the head, right? And Jeff Sessions is an important ally for Donald Trump, right? He's one of the people who actually has credibility with Donald Trump's base. The people at Breitbart really like him. So of all the people, it's not like angering Reince Priebus. Like, this is a guy who could actually do damage to you if you make him an adversary.
And this also has been sticking with me today. The one quality above all else that we have learned matters to this president is loyalty.
Yes.
And if you look up the definition of loyal to President Trump, there's a picture of Jeff Sessions with his "Make America Great" hat on from the election. The earliest and most ardent supporter of his election bid, defended him, was with him throughout, was one of his best spokespeople throughout. What was it that turned between them?
Well, it was the recusal, obviously. And to your point, Kate.
But that was also seen as widely as an ethical move.
Absolutely. But loyalty and what the president's views on loyalty and what is ethical or not are not always in alignment, right? So there may be some conflation. What Jeff Sessions did in recusing himself was absolutely the right thing to do, but I think what the president sees is an act of disloyalty. Someone who obviously came into the primary campaign, was there for him in the South, made a huge difference to him at that time. Not only the Sessions, but this entire interview. It was so clear that he cares about loyalty. The world is black and white. You're a good person, you're a bad person, you're with me, you're against me. Really, I thought it was quite revelatory.
It's also worth mentioning the president feels misled. You know, we know Jeff Sessions misled Congress in not revealing the 2 meetings with Kislyak. He obviously didn't reveal that to President Trump. That's what the context of the interview suggested to me. And look, the Russia investigation was always going to be a huge part of the Attorney General's job. Why would Donald Trump hire someone who would have to recuse himself from the vast majority of his job? If he had known about these meetings, he wouldn't have hired Jeff Sessions. He feels misled.
There wasn't a Russia investigation before he was appointed, right? This is all subsequent to him putting him in.
It's also very interesting. He doesn't say Sessions should have not recused himself because he could have been impartial, right? To go to your point, the implication is Sessions should have stayed there so he could protect me, right? It's the same thing we see with Comey. It's a fundamental lack of understanding that even though you hire these guys, they actually have an obligation to the Constitution and the rule of law.
Well, there on 2 fronts, Jim. There are other places in the interview, and I don't want to spend more time quoting it, but he hits Sessions, he hits the number 2, and he also says at one point that no matter what you think of history, the FBI director reports directly to the President of the United States. That is not the case. He reports to the Attorney General. Does the President understand, do you think, the need and requirement that the Department of Justice is independent and free of influence?
What I think the president grasps is that he's clearly frustrated with Jeff Sessions. And he has the authority to fire Jeff Sessions anytime he wants, and he hasn't done it yet, right? Now, we know with Comey, he reached that point.
Like, I don't understand. If you don't like him, kick him out.
But here's the thing. He recognizes that, one, replacing him may be a bit of a challenge because if Jeff Sessions wasn't good enough, what other high-profile,
for 20 years?
I mean, if you become the successor to Jeff Sessions, you become the next Attorney General, then what are the odds the President of the United States is going to go out and give another interview to the New York Times and say, this guy's even worse than Sessions? I can't. It's just going to be this endless cycle of this. So I think the President at least has a grasp of recognition that if he fires Sessions, if he goes after Rosenstein, one more Justice Department firing, and then it really hits the fan. And then the heads really start exploding over him being out of control, comparison to the Saturday Night Massacre with Nixon and things like that. So he may live with this frustration and vent about it on the record to the New York Times. So
this is what it is. This is the new normal.
Yeah.
I can't wait for Jeff Sessions to wake up tomorrow to what he sees in the papers. Guys, stand by. We've got a lot more to come. Coming up, his appointment was greeted with bipartisan praise. He has legal authority to follow the facts wherever they may lead. So why is President Trump now also going after special counsel Robert Mueller? What the president said that has some now crying obstruction of justice.
Heyo, Trey Kirby here, 1/4 of the starters, the biggest and best fourth, but at least that's my opinion. The rest is up to you. Don't forget to download our podcast, The Drop, every Friday wherever you get your podcasts, or find us at nba.com/thestarters.
I know Bob Mueller very well. I think he's a totally honest man. I'm a little upset about picking all these people from the former Democrat administration to work with him. I thought that was very unjustified.
And that is enthusiastic for Republican Senator Orrin Hatch, serving up one part praise and one part criticism of special counsel Robert Mueller, the man and his mission back in the spotlight right now after the president laid out a warning of sorts for Mueller and his Russia investigation in this bombshell interview with the New York Times. Stay in your lane, he basically said. Do not look beyond Russia or, well, he didn't quite say what he would do. The panel is back with me. Kaylee, why I'm still not understanding your argument that this is a better conversation that the president wants to be having than talking about where healthcare is right now, because some would argue that they made progress yesterday in getting everyone on message on healthcare. But I digress. Why is taking on Robert Mueller, laying down this warning, what does this get the president?
Well, he didn't say this unsolicited. The New York Times reporter asked him if Mueller delves into unrelated finances, your family's unrelated finances to the Russia investigation, is that crossing a line? He said yes. I think that's a pretty obvious answer. I mean, he was responding to a question. If he veers from the underlying jurisdiction of the investigation, which is Russia, it's defined as such, it's written out, then yes, he thinks that crosses a line. I think that's a completely fair point.
Anyone remember how Ken Starr got started on Monica Lewinsky?
Yeah, ask Bill,
with
Clinton about
with the Whitewater investigation.
And he got criticism for that.
It was a
right, he got criticism, and Republicans tried to
bad.
impeach him over it. Right, so it seems we have a pretty strong precedent that, in fact, the special counsel can go where he wants. The only way this makes sense to me is that he's trying to undermine Mueller now to send a message out to people so that no matter what Mueller finds, that they can say Mueller's corrupt, Mueller's not to be trusted, he's a partisan Democrat. If you actually had some faith that Mueller wasn't going to find such damning material, you wouldn't need to do this.
No, Jeffrey Toobin said it to me today. You know what the last thing you want to do, just if you really don't want someone to look somewhere, is to say, do not look under this piece of paper. Do not look here, especially to a special prosecutor. But take that in conjunction, on top of that he delves into, he was talking about Bob Mueller. He talked about the meeting that his son, that Don Jr. had back during the election, and weighed in on that as well. Does this sound like someone who is taking the advice of his legal team by talking about this?
No, there's a story
because even when asked, there's a way to not answer.
There is a story in the Washington Post, and the sources weren't quoted, so maybe this is made up, but it sounds very believable that the lawyers told Mr. President, in your best interest, you must not talk about X. They didn't specify what the topic was. Okay. And then on the way home, they look, the president just tweeted about X. Literally, within half an hour, he had totally ignored everything they'd said. And you think, and it's not like anybody in the White House, we were talking last segment about Jeff Sessions. Yeah. It's not like anybody in the White House would say, you know what would be good advice, Mr. President? Go out and rip your attorney general. That's really going to, that's going to do wonders for you. This is Trump following his own instinct. And while you can completely understand the frustration, the questions about Russia have dogged him since inauguration. Yeah. He feels like it's an attempt to undermine or delegitimize his victory. You can completely get all that. It would really be helpful to him if he'd learned to say the words something like, it's an ongoing investigation, and it just wouldn't be appropriate for me to talk about that right now. Yes, the president was asked about that. The president doesn't have to answer every question that, lots of presidents have a long, happy history.
He actually doesn't answer a lot of questions when you do ask him. When you do ask him.
Darn it, he's too accountable to questions.
Exactly. Too accountable. And let me just say, for the record, I'm a fan of more interviews than less. More access to the president, the better. Every president. Jeremy Diamond said something interesting at the top. Since this interview came out, the White House has done nothing so far. On camera, off camera, nothing. To soften the president's words, temper the president's words, nuance the president's words at all about Sessions, about Mueller, about what he said was discussed with Putin at the G20. They talked about sanctions, apparently.
Right, abortion. Adoption.
Yeah, exactly, adoption. What does that say?
I just wonder whether there is so much, not only in the article but in the transcript, that I wonder whether they're paralyzed. I mean, he talked about wanting to fire an attorney general. He undermined Bob Mueller, and I use my words specifically here, who is really of unimpeachable character, right? So I just wonder whether they're a little bit hamstrung and they're sitting there saying, how do we even massage this into something that is going to actually help the president? Maybe we just let it go.
Well, let me be cynical right now. Does any of this matter other than that it should matter? Does any of this matter? Is this one of those things where we're going to say that I'm going to be told tomorrow none of the president's supporters care if he's trashing his...
Yes, none of this matters. What they care about is Obamacare. What will determine if President Trump is in the White House in 4 years is Obamacare and taxes. That is vital. So the only thing that is harming the president right now is the fact that Republicans and Congress can't get their act together.
Right, but it's important to make a distinction between the normative and the political. Yes, politically it doesn't hurt Trump because everyone has already factored this in long ago. Right. But that doesn't mean it's right. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't try to maintain some semblance of ethical standards here, and that's why we have to keep saying this.
semblance of ethical standards. That is this table. Great to see you guys. Thank you so much. Day 182 of President Trump's administration. That is the state of America tonight. Ethical. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Don't laugh, Kaylee.